We lived in a charming villa surrounded by rolling vineyards and sprawling hills. It was a scene straight out of a romance novel. Ethan, my husband, was the kind of man that people wrote glowing columns about in local food magazines. He was a chef whose creations were as charismatic as his personality, and he brought his successes home charming even our 15-year-old daughter Emma, who frequently jokes that she might inherit his culinary genius. Our dinner table was frequently laden with. It wasn't that Ethan had changed. In fact, he was more present since his beloved restaurant burned down. Insurance lessened the financial blow, but his spirit was harder to mend. His days were spent trying out new recipes in our kitchen, Emma's eager eyes, and the clinking of wine glasses and stories that made me feel like we were everything we were supposed to be. However, in quiet moments, when the stories faded and the chandeliers dimmed, I found myself staring at the walls and feeling like a stranger in my own life. It wasn't unpleasant, but something inside of me ached for something I couldn't even name. I hadn't intended to attend the Harvest Festival that year, when Ethan was being honored as part of a regional chef showcase, and I was confused about where I fit into this seemingly ideal tableau. Maybe it was my own restlessness, but the days blended together with the same routines: Emma's school events, dinners with Ethan's old chef friends, and weekly trips to town for errands. As Ethan made his rounds among the chefs, I wandered away from the crowd, feigning to admire the handmade crafts, and that's when I saw them. The wanderers were impossible to ignore tonight. Their costumes glinted in the festival's golden light. Their movements were confident yet fluid, and they were unlike any men I had ever encountered, for they were all radiating a magnetic energy. I expected to smile, mingle, and engage in polite conversation. The square was alive with the chatter of locals and visitors alike. I was unaware that I was staring until Cyrus caught my gaze and held it, his lips curving into a knowing smile, and I quickly turned away, feeling my cheeks. Cyrus was a tall, silver, dreadlocked leader whose eyes seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Jax was wiry and mischievous, and his laugh cut through the air like a dare. Elias's quiet intensity and faraway gaze felt like he could see right through you, and Leo the fire dancer, a man who seemed to flirted with danger every time he spun those flaming torches. Before I could retreat, Ethan's voice called out from behind me. He was just as enthralled as I had been, and was excited to introduce himself to the troupe. He invited them to dinner at our villa, which is a typical act of hospitality from him, but something about this invitation felt special. The first dinner was magical. They arrived with their extravagant stories, carefree laughter, and a kind of energy that transformed our dining room into something completely different. Cyrus and Ethan became friends because they both loved telling stories. Was mesmerized by Jax's playful demeanor and Elias's poetry, and the Wanderers became a regular part of our lives. Over the course of the following few weeks, bonfires on our patio became a ritual, with their flames dancing as brightly as the troupe's endless tales. Leo wowed us with his fire dancing, and Jax's handstands and acrobatics made Emma smile with joy. Even Ethan seemed lighter, inspired by their inventiveness, but I also noticed something else, a spark that hadn't been there in years, a pull towards something vague. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Cyrus lingered by the fire. I stayed to clear the empty wine glasses, my heart racing for reasons I didn't want to look into, and he turned to me, his silver dreadlocks catching the firelight. I didn't know what to do with it at first, so I dismissed it as a passing curiosity, the kind you get when something new and shiny enters your life. But I couldn't deny how Cyrus's voice lingered in my mind long after he spoke, or how Jax's teasing sent a flicker of heat through me. He asked softly, his eyes searching mine, and I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I turned away, occupied with the glasses, and when I looked back, he was gone, but his question lingered in my mind for a long time. I lay next to Ethan in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, and that was the first time I allowed myself to question whether there was more to my life or to me. As the weeks went by, the Wanderers woke themselves more intricately into our lives. Emma's drawings of Elias started to accumulate on the coffee table, reflecting her teenage admiration for his quiet intensity. It was exciting to see Ethan brainstorming new restaurant ideas with Cyrus, who had a talent for spinning ideas as vividly as he spun his tales. However, their presence on Earth brought about something completely different for me that I found difficult to identify. Cyrus had a way of looking at me that made it seem like he could see the parts of me that I had forgotten existed, and his words carried in. Leo's boldness was magnetic, his energy a reminder of the recklessness buried beneath years of routine and responsibility. I tried to dismiss it all as harmless admiration, but my mind betrayed me, and I found myself lingering at the bonfires. Elias' poetry touched nerves I didn't even know were raw, his words both soothing and unsettling. Jax's playful jibs and effortless charm made me laugh in a way that felt almost dangerous, as though too much happiness might break something inside me. The group suggested that we set up a fire pit closer to the vineyards, where the vines stretched in dark twisting rows beneath a sky heavy with stars. The night was warm, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and ripe grapes. Ethan excused himself early, citing an early start on a new recipe. I continued looking for reasons to stay after Ethan and Emma retired for the night. I memorized bits of their stories, and the cadence of their voices made the air between us feel charged like a storm waiting to break. Emma had gone to her room with a book, and her laughter from earlier was still faintly resonating in the night, leaving only the wanderers and I. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night, and Cyrus spun another one of his captivating tales. For the first time in what seemed like ages, Jax leaned back on the grass and teased Elias for his overly dramatic delivery of a poem. Leo laughed, and his smile caught the firelight as he practiced spinning an unlit torch between his hands. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike. "You seem lost in thought," Cyrus said, his voice cutting through the haze. I realized that he had moved closer, his silver dreadlocks glinting in the firelight. "Not lost," I replied, forcing a faint smile to form on his lips. "Sometimes wandering is where you find what you've been missing," he said. It felt like forever. I wasn't thinking about the laundry I hadn't folded, the emails I hadn't answered, Emma's impending exams, or Ethan's lingering sadness over the restaurant. Sent a shockwave through me, but before I could react, Jax cut me off with a joke. The night should have continued, with the fire burning lower as the stories became softer and the laughter quieter. The others started to go to sleep one by one, as Leo, Jax, and Elias's footsteps faded toward the Villa Cyrus, and I remained, the firelight flickering between us. "You don't belong here," he said in a voice so quiet I almost thought I had imagined it. I gave him a sharp look. He cocked his head, studying me, saying, "This life, this role, it's not who you are." I wasn't sure why you didn't know me, so I said, "Defense, don't you?" in a gentle tone. "I see the way you look at us at me. You've been searching for something. Maybe it's freedom, passion, or just a reminder that you're alive." My breath caught, and I turned away, my pulse quickening. "You're wrong, am I?" Cyrus suddenly reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. Was so quick and deliberate that it seemed like the world had stopped for a moment. "You've forgotten how to be free," he whispered before I could respond, and his lips found mine. The kiss wasn't what I had anticipated. It was slow and deliberate, a question and an answer. And all at once, heat spread through me, igniting something I had buried so deeply that I nearly forgot everything. For a moment, I forgot everything. Ethan, Emma, the villa, the weight of my choices. There was only the fire, the stars, and Cyrus. When he pulled away, I should have. He said with a laugh, his tone light but his gaze lingering, and I didn't stop him. I didn't stop Elias when he returned minutes later, his quiet intensity luring me in like a magnet, and I didn't stop Leo. I should have walked back to the villa and closed the door on whatever was happening between us, but I didn't move. When Jax came back to get something he'd left behind, his playful grin widened at the sight of us, and he leaned down and planted a quick cheek kiss before I could react. When I eventually slipped back into the villa hours later, I half expected to wake up and discover that everything had been in my head, but deep down I knew it hadn't, because something had changed and there was no turning back. It started slowly, almost innocently, if something like this could ever be called that. His boldness sent shivers down my spine as he leaned close, brushing my lips in a fleeting, almost taunting gesture. The bonfires became our unspoken sanctuary, a fleeting touch that sent currents racing under my skin. The flickering light concealed things that words could not, but soon it wasn't enough. The first time I slipped away, it was in the moonlight, and the villa was quiet from the weight of sleep. Cyrus had casually suggested it during a late-night conversation, his words laced with that knowing smile of his. "There's a place where the stars seem brighter." I told myself it was harmless, a way to break the monotony. A harmless indulgence. But when I discovered him waiting among the vineyards with the moonlight silvering his dreadlocks, I realized there was nothing innocent about it. We spoke for hours about the dark, winding maze of the vines, and he told me stories about his travels. His voice was low and calming in the still night air, and at one point he reached for my hand, which I gave to him. When he kissed me, it wasn't like the kiss by the fire. It was softer and more leisurely, as though he wanted to commit every moment to memory. Became our meeting spot. But it wasn't just Cyrus I found waiting in the shadows one afternoon when Jax and I happened to cross paths near the woods. He had been gathering wildflowers for Emma, who had started drawing nature in her spare time, and he held one out to me with his playful smile. He said, "You've been spending too much time with Emma, and she'll think you're some kind of forest sprite," and I laughed, shaking my head. "Perhaps I am," he shot back, "or perhaps I just know how to make people smile." A week later, Elias found me by the old fountain in the village square, a place where no one went after dark. His poetry had always resonated with me, but that night it was different. He recited a verse he claimed had been inspired by me. His voice was soft and reverent, and I said, "You speak like I'm a muse." His laughter was contagious, and when he leaned in, his kiss was as light and fleeting as his personality playful, almost like a dare. When he reached for me, Elias's kiss was different from the others because it was deliberate and almost hesitant, as if he were afraid I might disappear if he moved too quickly. His words lingered in my mind for a long time after we parted, a whispering echo that refused to fade. Leo, of course, was bolder. He found me after one of his fire-dancing performances, his confidence as unrelenting as the flames he commanded. "When is my turn?" He teased me with a smirk tinged. It was my turn to pretend I didn't know, but my heartbeat quickened as he approached. The smell of smoke and earth clinging to him made me say, "You've got the rest of them spinning in circles." His voice was low, and he said, "I want to see if it's as intoxicating as they say." His kiss was fiery, similar to his dancing, a mix of boldness and danger that left my head spinning. With each of them, I felt pieces of myself awakening, parts one hadn't realized I'd silenced over the years. Emma would show me her most recent sketches, her excitement untarnished by suspicion, and I told myself that it wasn't hurting them, that I could keep the two worlds apart, but the lies I told were hurting them. I was bold, and they were mirrors, each reflecting a different side of me. A woman I had almost forgotten existed, but as thrilling as it was, the weight of it started to press down on me. Returning to the villa after those stolen moments felt heavier with each day. I could feel the cracks showing and the life I'd built slipping through them, but when I was with the Wanderers, the rest of the world felt distant, and their energy was muted. At home, Emma withdrew her laughter at dinner and replaced it with quiet glances at her sketchbook. At the same time, the lines between duty and desire had already begun to splinter, and the weight of the double life I was leading began to press harder on me, its grip tightening with each day. Then, after another evening by the fire, with the flames low and the air thick with unsaid tension, Cyrus made a suggestion. Jax had fallen asleep on the couch, Elias was absorbed in a book, and Leo was absently spinning an unlit torch in his hands. "You need space," Cyrus said, his voice cutting through the stillness. Their freedom and way of life were addictive at the time, but even their presence in the villa started to feel too close to my real life, too entangled with the world I was trying to escape. Meant by the words, "There's a place we go sometimes," either literally or figuratively. He kept his eyes steady and said, "There's a cabin by the lake. It's quiet, tucked away, and nobody to answer to or watch over you. Just the stars and the water." I hesitated at the idea because it felt risky, but wasn't I already in too deep? You'd like it, Jack said, half asleep but smiling. The others agreed, and before I knew it, I had agreed. The following afternoon, I excused myself by telling Ethan that I was going to run errands and met the wanderers at the edge of the woods. The drive to the cabin felt like crossing a threshold, and the winding dirt path pulled me deeper into a world I wasn't sure I could leave. When we got there, I got out of the car and took everything in. The cabin was small, with rough hune logs that blended in perfectly with the surrounding towering pines. Beyond it, the lake stretched out like a sheet of glass reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Not bad, Jack said, nudging me playfully. It's beautiful, I said, my voice almost a whisper. The cabin was simple but cozy, with mismatched furniture, a stone fireplace, and a subtle cedar scent that made it feel like we had traveled back in time. Leo lit a fire, Elias opened a window to let the cool lake air in, Cyrus unpacked a bag of supplies, and Jax dug through a cabinet for something he wouldn't show us. Make yourself at home, Cyrus said, pointing to a white leather armchair by the fire. For the first time in what seemed like years, I allowed myself to unwind as the hours passed in a fog of. As night fell, we went outside to sit under the stars. Cyrus remained mostly silent, watching from the corner as if he was content to watch, but every now and then I would catch his eye, and the intensity in his gaze made my pulse quicken. We laughed and told stories, and Jax revealed the mystery item, a tin of homemade cookies that we devoured with wine. Leo taught me how to flip one of his torches without setting myself on fire, even though I came dangerously close. A symphony of crickets and rustling leaves filled the air as the lake shimmered in the moonlight. Cyrus poured wine into mismatched mugs and started one of his signature stories, which told of a captain who refused to abandon his ship even as it sank beneath the waves. His voice was steady, and each word drew me deeper into the story. You know what she needs, Jack said, interrupted abruptly by a wide smile and a mischievous Leo. What's a proper toast now? Jack said, leaping. He took hold of my hand and pulled me up with him to the retreat's queen. The others moaned, but they all raised their mugs in unison, so I laughed to cover the way my cheeks burned. I don't think I deserve that title, I said. Cyrus's quiet but firm voice struck a deep chord with me. I looked at him, the firelight casting shadows across his face, and before I could change my mind, I crossed the space between us. The others fell silent as I leaned down and pressed my lips to his. The moment passed unsaid, etched into the night like the constellations above us as the fire burned low and the others started to retreat inside. I stayed on the porch as the weight of reality crept back in uninvited. I thought of Ethan, Emma, and the life that awaited me across the hills, but the thought of returning felt impossible. He kissed me in a deliberate and unhurried manner when I pulled back, and he looked at me with something I couldn't name that felt like both understanding and regret. I knew the villa was no longer my home when I finally left the cabin. The drive back to the villa felt like crossing into another world. As the dirt path turned to asphalt, the wild woods gave way to cultivated vineyards, and the stillness of the lake was replaced by the quiet hum of the streets. He draped his jacket over my shoulders and said, "You don't have to go." I looked up at him, my eyes full of questions I didn't dare ask, but he was straightforward. The more I drove into that familiar landscape, the heavier it all became. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was high in the sky, and the villa stood as it always had, perfectly inviting and the epitome of stability. But when I stepped inside, I felt like a trespasser in my own house. The faint smell of freshly baked bread was a sure sign that Ethan had been in the kitchen, and Emma's laughter drifted down from upstairs, but it was muted and distant, as if I were hearing it through a layer. Ethan's voice startled me. "You're back." I put my bag down to try to collect my thoughts, but they were scattered like dry leaves in the wind. What now? How was I supposed to return to this life when my heart was still tangled in the wilderness of the cabin, still caught in the firelight of stolen moments? I turned to find him standing in the kitchen doorway, his apron dusted with flowers. He looked at me as if he was trying to read a book whose pages had been torn out. "Yes," I said, My voice quieter than I intended. "I'm sorry, I." He stepped closer, hesitating as though he wanted to say more but not knowing how, and finally reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You look tired. Go rest. I'll call you when lunch is ready." I nodded again, my throat too tight to speak upstairs. Emma was in her art studio, her face lit with concentration as she worked on a new project. His eyes flickered with something relief, maybe, or suspicion that we missed you. I stood in the doorway and watched her, amazed at how she seemed unaffected by the chaos that had engulfed me. She must have sensed my presence, because she looked up and narrowed her eyes a little. "Hey, Mom," she said in a neutral tone, and I responded, "Hey, what are you working on?" She said dismissively, turning back to her work, but her shoulders were tense and her brush movements were stiff. I wanted to say more to break down the wall I felt separating us, but I couldn't. Instead, I let her paint before withdrawing to my own room, where I collapsed onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. What was I doing? The question kept coming back to me, louder and louder every second. The memories of the cabin, the stories, the laughter, and the kiss were a stark contrast to the villa's quiet. I had persuaded myself that I could have both, that the cabin was a different world, but that delusion was destroying Emma's quiet distance, Ethan's trust, and the fissures in our life together. I couldn't know how to stop it, how to look Ethan in the eye and tell him the truth, how to face Emma and admit that I had betrayed the very values I had tried to teach her, or whether to end it, walk away from the Wanderers, and try to mend what I had broken, or follow the pull of the life they offered, a life where I felt alive. But when I closed my eyes, I heard Cyrus's voice, Jax's laughter, Elias' poetry, and Leo's audacious smile. I remained in that room for hours, torn between two worlds, knowing that the time for pretending was running out. I didn't have the answers, and all I knew was that the weight of my decisions was crushing me and that whatever road I choose, something would be lost.